This is part three of my uh, basic making a comic book series. And so this is where we're going to talk about doing the art and putting it all together, right? So here we go. When it comes to putting it together, most important thing is, getting that art on paper or on the page. So for me, it always works out where I've plotted the story. On one side here, you see my basic plot sketches, and then I have a little doodle of my page layout. Well, that little doodle is what helps me visualize how I'm going to arrange the panels and where I'm going to put the characters. And so then you see here on the other side a sketched penciled version of those characters and how they're kind of laid out based on that original plot. And I try to strategically give myself places to put the text, the dialogue, and the other things that go into the story. And that's an important part of building your page design is remembering you got to fit the dialogue in there. You got to fit the narration in there. And you got to have a place to put your special effects and the other things that go into the story. And so there's a big back and forth for me, sketching it out, doodling it out, penciling it, and then figuring out where to put all that stuff in the end. And so there's a little bit of editing that goes on. Also, I find it's useful to read and reread what I've done to really make sure that the story is holding together. But first, as long as the story works visually and you can kind of understand the pantomime of what's happening, then you know you're on the right track. And then you just kind of put in the little text and dialogue as an icing on the cake. Now, for me in my process, I've done both, traditional pen and ink, where I will take those pencils and I will then start inking over the top. Traditionally, the way to do this for me was I would pencil it out. I would scan that artwork, convert it to a light blue, print it on Bristol board, and then come back with pens like microns and ink it up. And then I would rescan that inked artwork as my final for the pages. Now that was a multi-step process of getting it in and out of the computer. But the benefit of that is you have some originals. You have the original pencils and you have the original inks, and they're separate from each other, which in traditional comic book art wasn't always possible because you had to basically work on top of the original until you had a final piece. Now, for times saving, what I do is I work almost entirely in Procreate. So I do all my penciling and my inking and my layout inside Procreate. It's such a handy tool. A lot of people use Clip Studio as well. That's another piece of software or good old Photoshop to do it. For me, it's just become so much more convenient to use my iPad with Procreate to be able to pencil and do all the stages I need in the iPad. But the drawback is I don't have any originals anymore. So I can make prints of those pages, but I don't have any original handcrafted art, uh, one of a kind art. But the process is still very much the same. I like dividing it up in that traditional process of pencil, ink, and then final color. Now, coloring I used to do in Photoshop for a long time. And again, now, like I said, I do it in Procreate. Of course, I mentioned Clip Studio. This is another option. It's a good, inexpensive option, and it works on PCs, it works on tablets, and so it's a good kind of universal option as well. A lot of manga artists use it. Other comic book artists use it. It also has a lot of embedded, whether it's speech balloons or special effects, halftone patterns, a lot of traditional things that you might want to add to your art, which are embedded into the libraries of Clip Studio, which is really helpful. Of course, the next thing is once you've got your art done, you've penciled it, inked it, colored it, put it together. Now you got to actually lay out your pages. And for me, it comes back to InDesign. So I always build books in InDesign. InDesign is kind of that workhorse that lets you lay out pages, arrange them in book form so that you can do printing. So I have to worry about printing, so I always do things in InDesign so I can do all the pre-flight and the necessary layout to get that in book form. With I also do the dialogue and things like that in InDesign, so it's kind of another process, another step in the process to put all that together. So you kind of got to figure out which direction you're going to go to make it easier on yourself. Of course, you got to get into how am I going to deal with the lettering and the special effects. So a lot of times I do specialty type in Illustrator, so I can go in and illustrate the text, add color, do the outlines, make the gradient colors, whatever I need, and those are then placed into my artwork in InDesign and added as a final step. So sound effects for me nowadays are vector art done in Illustrator. Of course, back in the day, it was all done by hand. I don't know which is better. To me, these days, I have a little nostalgia to the old way of doing it by hand. But in terms of speed and time, now I just work everything digital. Then the next question is, what do you do with your book? So self-publishing is definitely my advice for you nowadays. Breaking into the industry, I think, has never been harder. I don't know that publishers are looking for us anymore. And comic books themselves, traditional floppy comics, seem to be kind of a dying art form. The publication circulation is much smaller than it ever was in the past. And so, what are we to do? We're in love with a dying art form, and not many people are buying it. So for myself, I've chosen the self-publishing route. So I format my books so that they can be printed on Amazon. And I like that because then those books are in a form and a format that can be printed on demand. So what you want to do is get familiar with the Amazon Kindle direct publishing library and what is possible in print on demand, which means that when your book is available for sale, they only print it when someone orders it. Now, that makes the book a little bit more expensive and it reduces the amount of money you make per book that you sell, but it also eliminates some of the upfront costs that you might have trying to sell a printed book, meaning you'd have to print 1,000 copies and then hustle to sell those 1,000 copies. Well, that certainly is more cost effective per book, but it also leaves you with a lot of books that you have to sell. So for me personally, I prefer the Amazon route. So my books are online, available for sale at any time, and then they're printed and sent out to my customers. Now, someone that I recommend looking at who talks a lot about what's happening to the comic industry is Eric July, kind of looking at where is publishing and how independent creators really are the future, I think, of the comics industry. And someone like Eric, I think, has good advice and good thoughts on the process. You can look for his podcast and look at what he recommends to make your book successful. And the last thing I would say in regard to that is post your book, post it around everywhere you can. Figure out where to put it online, make a website, put it on your Instagram, put it on your Facebook, whatever, but just have it out there so people can see it. Obviously, the people are afraid of sharing their work. What's going to happen? Is someone going to steal it? Someone going to take it? Personally, that hasn't happened to me. In fact, it's just been a benefit to get more eyeballs on my stories. And it usually comes around to where if someone sees it online, then you can entice them to say, hey, well, if you like the story and you like what you saw, then why not get a printed copy with my signature or a doodle inside to keep for your collection? And people are interested in that. So that's something I think that is kind of a crossover. So you have your book available as a web comic, and then you have a printable version or a print version that you can share when you meet them in person, or they can order from your website too. Now, what does that mean? That means as an independent creator, if you want to be successful in comics, I think you have to get comfortable with self-publishing. Now, whether or not that leads to a larger publishing contract, that's what I hope for all of us, that that can happen. But in the meantime, the more work you put out there, the more you're visible, the more you work and share your stuff, the more people are going to find it. And at the very least, you're scratching that itch and getting your art out there for people to see. And that in and of itself is a valiant effort to share your work with the world because we need it. All right, good luck.